This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
I am passionate about advanced care planning, Helen, and I think we all need to plan from 18 to 180. But what happens is you get a diagnosis, and now they've got to decide about treatment plans. They've got to decide about what they're going to do if they need care at home. They've got to think of hospices. They've got to think of medical appointments. There's so many things that come into play. And with advanced care planning, a doula can come in and sit down with a family. And as we always say, we meet them where they're at.
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. My guest today is end-of-life doula Pam Carter, and we're going to be taking a deep dive into the role of a doula in advanced care planning. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
The sponsor for this episode of The Heart of Hospice is National HME. National HME is a direct service hospice durable medical equipment company. Using their proprietary software, Hospice Cloud Pro, providers can enter new patient information, order equipment, arrange pickups, and obtain real-time reporting, including order status and much more. National HME excels at providing service with care and empathy. To learn more, visit nationalhme.com. Today's episode is sponsored by Odonata Care. Odonata's motto is, "Care is treatment." They have a mission to transform the end-of-life experience for the patient and caregivers through education and support. Odonata Care is revolutionizing the hospice experience with their booklet, The Care Plan, A Path to Comfort for the Hospice Patient, along with 50 free YouTube videos that teach the basics of bedside care. Visit thecareplan.net for more information. Now, here's today's episode.
So this is episode 2 of our 3-part series in collaboration with the International Doula Life Movement. We've been talking with Anna Adams, and today we've got Pam Carter. Pam Carter is a certified end-of-life doula and a life planning specialist. Pam works with the IDLM as the Student Success Director and a life planning specialist instructor. And she's the perfect person to talk about this because today we are talking about all things related to advanced care planning. We're going to get into a lot of detail. Pam's going to share her wisdom and the experiences she's had as an end-of-life doula. So here's my conversation with Pam Carter. Pam, welcome to the show. It's great to talk with you.
So excited to be here, Helen. I'm really excited to do this with you.
It's been a while since we connected, so I'm going to jump in with an icebreaker question just to get to know you and let our listeners get to know you a little bit. And it's going to segue well into our topic for today. But if you could only have one food for the rest of your life, what would you choose?
One food for the rest of my life. It would probably be a mighty meaty pizza from Mellow Mushroom.
Oh, wow. Pizza. That's a good choice.
Oh, mighty meaty. It's got all the meats on it. And it's got sauce and cheese, and they put onion on it. So, I mean, I could live off of that for the rest of my life.
Yeah, not for very long, though. With all that meat, yeah, it wouldn't last you. Yeah, you'd have a heart attack. So it's a good thing that we're talking about your favorite foods and what you would want to have for the rest of your life, because today we're talking about advanced care planning and how end-of-life or death doulas work with families and patients to do advanced care planning, and what they want to eat, like comfort feedings and things like that. That's actually part of advanced care planning. So let's back up just a little bit. You are an end-of-life doula. You work with the International Doula Life Movement. How in the world did you come to work as an end-of-life doula in this strange business, the death-positive business we have these days?
Helen, I've done this work for 40 plus years, and I didn't know that I was doing doula work until, 2021, when the word doula started popping up for end-of-life workers. I always referred to myself as a transition coach. And how I came into the work was, in the beginning, I seemed to be the person that was calm in the middle of a storm in a room. And so I would start asking the right questions. And from that, family, it began with family. They'd call me and say, so-and-so's going on, can you get up here? And I'd end up in the emergency room or the hospital negotiating what was going on. And then from that, friends started asking me, can you come over and talk to us? Or terminal diagnoses. A lot of people being diagnosed with cancer in the beginning, and trying to negotiate all the waters and understanding about the therapies, and talking about, is it going to help me to live, or is it just going to give me some time? So it became the conversation of quality over quantity. And I've never had to advertise. Before I was working with the school, my clients were always referred to me. And on the average, I would work with anywhere from 5 to 10 families a year.
So you were a doula and you didn't even know it.
I was a caring soul, is how I looked at it.
Yeah, it's a natural gift for you. So let's talk about end-of-life doula work, because it is a fairly new term. A lot of people have never even heard of it. I mean, I work in hospice, so I've heard of it. There are a lot of misconceptions about what end-of-life or death doulas do. What is the most outrageous myth you've ever heard somebody talk about when it comes to the role of an end-of-life doula?
Well, it really isn't the end-of-life doula. I think the most outrageous thing that's happened to me is I've had people go, oh, well, then you can do birth doula work. And I'm like, opposite ends of the spectrum. One ushers you in and I usher you out.
Yeah.
And then for people not to truly understand that we're there for compassion and support and resource and knowledge, and we shore up the gap that gets larger as someone's illness goes on, depending on what their circumstances are. If they're going through treatment that is really, it's not going to change the outcome, and it's going to take away from a good quality end. So trying to educate people on that, and talking to them about the merit of things that we're undereducated in by life as a whole, and because of the way society looks at everything.
Yeah. I love this concept that people figure if you're an end-of-life doula, then you can help deliver babies, right? You're a birth doula. It's kind of like if you need to have brain surgery and you say to your gynecologist, well, you went to medical school, you can just remove this brain tumor from me. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wrong end of the body, wrong body system, and you don't want that to happen. That's not an expert.
I think of that famous line out of a movie that says, I don't know anything about birthing babies.
Exactly. The labor is the same, but the end result is actually going the complete opposite direction. So our focus today for this episode is, this is number 2 of a 3-part series where we're talking with you and Anna Adams from the IDLM about the work that end-of-life doulas do. Our focus for today's interview is advanced care planning, because that is a huge part of what we do in hospice and in end-of-life doula work. And doulas are right in the middle of those conversations. How is a doula involved in advanced care planning discussion with someone who's seriously ill or with their families, their caregivers? How does a doula participate in that?
Well, it depends on when the doula's called in. I am passionate about advanced care planning, Helen, and I think we all need to plan from 18 to 180. But what happens is you get a diagnosis, and now they've got to decide about treatment plans. They've got to decide about what they're going to do if they need care at home. They've got to think of hospices. They've got to think of medical appointments. There's so many things that come into play. And with advanced care planning, a doula can come in and sit down with a family. And as we always say, we meet them where they're at. So sometimes you're going to meet a family that may have a little bit of planning in place. Maybe they've talked to somebody before they talk to you. Maybe they filled out an advanced care directive that the physician has handed to them. So there is a beginning point, and we have to walk into whatever their beginning point is going to be and lead them from that forward. And that can be discussing initial doctor appointments, resources, letting them know what's available as far as if they're in a community based on their age, if they're seniors, what does that senior community offer to those seniors when they're going through things like this, and the resources that we can help them with. We also talk to them about all stages of end-of-life planning, from do you want to get extenuated care? Do you want to just focus on your quality and your comfort care? Do you want to be in a hospital? Do you want to be at home? Do you want to be under a pecan tree swinging in a hammock? There's nothing at end of life that shouldn't be considered, because this is the end of life, and we should be able to do it on our terms. And if that means that the patient wants to try every medical device out there, then we support them in that. We educate them as to the good and the bad, and then we walk that walk with them whichever way they decide to go.
There's a lot to unpack in this, Pam. So first of all, when people come to us too late to, well, not too late to have the conversations, but later in a diagnosis, there are also people that come to us late in the game with urgent needs because there's been an acute event, a stroke, a heart attack, something catastrophic, an accident. So how do you handle those conversations where time is so limited, the conversations have to immediately be very intense? How do you step in there?
I begin by trying to get to know the people that I'm working with, the clients, so that I sort of know their personality and what they would expect, and so that I don't say anything that might be off-putting, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I meet them where they're at, and I find out what they're thinking and what they're understanding. I ask them, what do they understand from the diagnosis that they've been given? Hopefully, they are able to talk to me about this, because we're going on the hypothesis that the person that's gotten this tragic news is still able to vocalize for themselves. If they're not able to vocalize for themselves, then I've got to sit with a family and talk with that family about, what would you think this person would have liked, or what did they express in the course of their life? And I guide each family differently. I don't think, Helen, that there is a set plan for how to have that conversation. It depends on the people that you're sitting with and how they present to you. For example, I had 2 daughters and a father that I recently consulted with, and the mother has end-stage kidney failure. And so we talked with him about what was his importance for her life. What did he see? We talked about how the girls and what they felt about. And then from that, I was able to decipher the fact that everybody wanted the quality of life, that nobody wanted anybody to suffer, that they wanted to make sure she was being taken care of in the best possible way. And their confusion was, how do we go about that? What's best for her? Because dad's aging, and I might add, had early onset dementia. So he's really not suited to be mom's caregiver around the clock. So then we talked about caregivers around the clock and having hospice, because she would be hospice appropriate with her diagnosis, having hospice come in and setting the stage for what they can anticipate over the course of whatever time. And we never say how much time, because we don't know. Your doctor doesn't know. Nobody knows how much time somebody's got. So when I'm talking with families, I always tell them things can change. It's like a roller coaster. Today you can be up and happy and high and everything's great. And tomorrow you can be at the bottom and can't even raise your head up. But then lo and behold, here we are midway up the climb again. So in doing so, we have to prepare for all those levels, and we have to be ready for whatever stage is presenting itself.
Let's touch back on that for just a second. When there have been no conversations about advanced care planning, no conversations about end-of-life wishes, and some people live a very long life and never have those conversations because they just don't want to, or they've had, something catastrophic happen very suddenly. So when you're guiding a decision maker for a person who can no longer communicate, who never discussed anything about end of life, how do you go about that? What tools do you like to use?
Well, there is a couple of card decks, the end-of-life deck, the end-of-life doula deck, the EOL deck that has recently come out, which really helps with conversations. I also use a workbook that gives an example of what the scenario can be. And then I go through the workbook with the clients and say, let's just look at some possibilities. And this will give you an opportunity to think. And it gives the suggestion of someone that may be having cardiac problems or renal problems. And it says what the diagnosis would be, like it's terminal. And therefore, they could either choose to extend their life by having dialysis, or they could choose to not do dialysis and have the quality of life. So it gives them a chance to have those open decisions. I try to get to know individuals on an individual basis, especially like you're talking about when you're called in and it's critical. I mean, I had a critical phone call the other night, terminal stage cancer, and like 3 to 6 weeks to live. No advanced care plan, none of this in place. So I began to ask the very difficult questions, because I felt like we're in a countdown. We're against the hourglass, and we've got to find out as much as we can. So asking, what does the family believe in? What are your beliefs? What's your experience? Have y'all ever experienced hospice? And fortunately, in this case, they had, but they didn't even know how hospice got called in. So educating them on how you would get on to hospice, educating them about a quality of care that would give you comfort, but not extend life, versus care that can extend life, but often offers you no quality in the end. Again, with the example of dialysis, some patients go on dialysis and they're terminal, and they're doing dialysis 3 times a week to get the toxins out of their body. But when they go to dialysis is several hours long, depending on the individual. And so they're either 3, 4, maybe 6 hours in a dialysis chair. When they come home, they don't have the energy to open their eyes. Yeah. They sleep at night through the entire day the next day. And then all of a sudden they're feeling better the next night. But guess what? Tomorrow at 9 o'clock, they go back to dialysis. So we talk about those situations. And if someone says, well, we want to try it, then I encourage them to do what they think they need to do. But I talk with them about the therapies. I talk with them about really the hard decisions. This is a life-altering illness. And at the end, this loved one is going to pass. So let's talk about, do you have funeral arrangements? Have you discussed? Do you know if cremation, burial, traditional burial, green burial? I go through the different things that can be offered to a family and explain to them how those work. That's why I always say I'm an end-of-life death educator, because I talk about everything that's really uncomfortable.
And those are hard topics for you and me. It's an everyday conversation. We read about it. We talk with our coworkers and our colleagues. But for these folks, none of that is normal for them.
The sponsor for this episode of The Heart of Hospice is National HME. National HME is a direct service hospice durable medical equipment company that's serious about providing excellent service through communication and coordination for providers and families. They aim to be an extension of the hospice care team and to make DME the easiest part of the hospice provider's day. Using their proprietary software, Hospice Cloud Pro, providers can enter new patient information, order equipment, arrange pickups, and obtain real-time reporting on their order status, plus much more. National HME also provides text message notifications which keep everyone up to date on when the equipment will be delivered. National understands how important communication is when it comes to every aspect of a hospice patient's care. Here's Chris Maglioka, Senior Vice President of Business Development, describing how National HME technicians stay connected with patients and families.
The family will know through text messaging when the technician's on their way. They'll actually know the technician's name. So, we get the order, our call center calls that patient's family and lets them know, we received the order from the hospice, we'll be out there this afternoon. The technician will contact you with an ETA, and then again, they're going to get that next phone call plus a text message from the technician introducing themselves, letting them know who they are, and then with their ETA. It all starts and ends with the communication part.
National HME does more than just provide equipment. They provide service with care and empathy. To learn more about the services provided by National HME, you can visit their website at nationalhme.com. This episode is sponsored by Odonata Care. Odonata Care founders Nancy Hireman and Brenda Kazire have crafted a 32-page booklet called The Care Plan, A Path to Comfort for the Hospice Patient. Here's what certified hospice and palliative care nurse Helen Bauer says about the Odonata Care booklet.
As an end-of-life educator and advocate, I'm always on the lookout for great resources to share with caregivers and anyone dealing with a serious illness. The Care Plan from Odonata Care has features that users can access anytime they need it. There's information about the symptoms we commonly manage at end of life, like pain, anxiety, shortness of breath, and secretions. Caregivers can use the Care Plan's tracking forms for medications and write down specific instructions for their loved ones. There's even a section on how to use meds safely and appropriately. The Care Plan from Odonata Care is the perfect bedside resource for caregivers.
You can purchase copies of the Care Plan for yourself or your hospice agency at thecareplan.net. A new Spanish edition is also available for purchase on their website in either print or digital versions. Now, back to today's episode.
One of the things that strikes me is you include funeral planning, memorial planning, body disposition, what do you want done, cremation, green burial, as part of your advanced care planning. What about whole body donation?
We talk about that in great detail. And I do talk to families about that. There's a lot of misconception about body donation because some people think, I want to donate my body. So, if you're my aunt and I say, Helen, when I die, give my body to science. And they think that's all you can do. You don't have to do anything else.
Right. You just tell me that and automatically we make it happen.
And the flip side of that coin is if you love me, that's a good thing. But if you really hate me, that could be a bad thing because that's a way not to have to do anything. Hey, I was a donator to a body organ donation place, wherever it might be. But the truth of the matter is there's a process to that.
Yes.
And misunderstandings and misconceptions and myths about body donation. Myths such as, if you're an organ donor, you can't have an open casket. That's false. You can have an open casket if you're an organ donor. Myths that if you're a body donator, that, it's going to be horrible what they do to your body and you just wouldn't believe. No, that's not true either, because you can designate whether you want to be for medical purposes or any type of scientific purposes. Do you want to be a crash dummy? And I hate to say that, but you could choose to be a crash dummy because they use human bodies for that purpose, but you've got to choose.
Right.
You specify, what you do and do not want. And then the forms to be filled out. And you've got to have, most importantly, if you're going to be an organ donator or a body donator, you've got to have an alternate plan because there is a possibility that I'm going to give my body to the university at Vanderbilt for science education. And they may not have a slot for me on the day that I die. And in which case, they might suggest, could you take your body and donate it to this facility if a spot's available? Or you have to have end-of-life cremation, burial, or something in that nature set aside. And then people also have to understand when they donate their bodies, like if you donate your body to forensic science, your family never gets any portion of your body back because your body just keeps on giving. It is a universal give from now to forever. There's not a time that they won't be able to use that donation in some form or fashion.
Yeah.
Really try to educate. We want to make sure that people understand if they're going to be an organ donor, for example. Everybody has to know you're an organ donor. You have to have everything put in place to be an organ donor, because the team that does the work for the organ donation center has to be ready to move when you're no longer viable. And there again, people have to understand that just because you say, I'll donate my organs, does not mean that you will not get treatment to the very end. We're taken care of until a doctor says you're medically deceased.
I think there's a lot of misconception around total whole body donation. So if you donate to, say, a medical school, and I know this because I've had to learn it from my mom. My mom she's part of the willed body donation at one of the medical schools here in Texas. But there are things that disqualify you. And I have actually gone to a death as a hospice nurse early in my career, an older man who had died, and his son said he is a body donor. Well, when they called the program, there's like a little screening. I think I was the one that made the call. They asked a few questions. Well, lo and behold, the guy was disqualified because of some medical condition. I don't know if it was sepsis, because you can't have active contagions, things like that, tuberculosis. The gentleman did not qualify for the body donation because of that. And his son, who was from out of town, all of a sudden was left with coming up with a plan B that had not previously existed, and was asking me, it was back in the days where we had phone books, and he was going through the phone book to find a funeral home. The chances of finding something that's a good fit, this was 2 a.m. You're just taking whatever you can get and hoping it turns out to be a good experience because there's no plan. But they did not have a backup plan because the gentleman wanted this and he didn't really even want to consider anything else, which is sad, right? Because they couldn't honor his wishes. But that kind of thing happens. And I think in advanced care plan conversations, we want to do the one and done, because these are very tender, very intimate pain points in conversations. So for me to sit down with my mom and say, Mom, what do you want us to do if they won't accept your body? And then have to explain to her, well, if you had a raging infection, if you were septic, they won't accept your body after that. Yeah, so having those plan B, that backup plan, that's super important when it comes to advanced care planning. I don't think we talk about that often enough.
We don't. We don't talk about alternate plans. Somebody says, I want to be a body donor. And just like this gentleman you're talking about, okay, great, we can do that. That's all. Conversation ends. But there always needs to be an A and B plan in anything that we're doing. And when I do advanced care planning with clients, I always bring up, but let's discuss the what if, so that if we need an alternate plan, it's in place. It's just like with advanced care planning, one of the things, that we talk about is having that advocate that can speak for you. And I'm of the belief that you don't have one, you don't have two. 3 is great, more is better. And I have had families where they're spread out over the United States, and maybe mom and dad are in one area and one sibling is in Georgia and the next one's in Alabama, and then one might be in Tennessee, but the other one's in California. Well, California is not a good spokesperson, but Georgia would be your first. And then who can get here quicker, Alabama or Tennessee? And I always try to make sure that they've got people lined up. If they don't have somebody that could get here quick and everybody's on the West Coast, I always ask about friends that would step in. and do that until that person could arrive, that they could be that point contact. Because you and I both know, Helen, that in an emergency situation, in an emergency room, when everybody's going 900 to 90 in a second, nobody's got time to wait for a phone call. So sometimes you've got to have that point person, if nothing else, that can be on the phone. Okay, this is happening. Now what?
Right. Having that healthcare proxy, that medical power of attorney, that designated decision maker is the single most important piece of an advanced care plan, because the right person is going to make the right decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, even if you don't have anything else written down.
And it's so important, too, when they choose that person, that they choose someone capable of the job and not someone you're emotionally attached to. And sometimes, with families, they want to choose their oldest son, their oldest daughter, or they want to choose, a brother or a sister. And that's great. But are they going to be able to be headstrong, follow your directions, and stand, true to what's been requested and honor that? Or are they going to falter because of their relationship with you?
Yeah. Sometimes that's not an easy job, especially if there are a lot of family members who are very vocal.
Yes. And I mean, like in my circumstance, my middle daughter is my spokesperson, but I also know that she needs backup. And so, therefore I've named her brother as a backup to that. Well, he's good, but I also feel like, I'm mom, so you have to think about that. So at the end of the day, I have a really close friend that I call the Hammer, and she's the one that would step up and go, okay, guys, this is the way it is. We know we don't want to say goodbye to mom, but mom said no to this, no to that, and this is her request. So that's what we're going to do. Don't you agree? And then she can pull the two ends together and support them in that joint decision. Because when you don't have a decision maker, you were talking about your mother, Helen. My mother had a stroke, and this has been about, it's probably been 20 years ago now. She had a stroke. She ended up in the emergency room. She was in a fetal position in the bed. She was going south. She certainly was not improving at all. And I remembered hearing, or I was aware of hearing at that time, the nurse kept telling the physician, and it began with, we have 2 hours and 15 minutes. And then it was, we have 2 hours and 10 minutes. And then she was like, you're down to an hour. You're down. And she counted it all the way down to, she said, we're about 30 minutes out. And finally, this physician turned to me and he said, okay, he said, I need to talk to you. And then he explained a treatment that they could give to my mother that at the time he said was fairly new. He didn't say it was brand new. He said fairly new, that it was fairly new, and that there weren't a lot of statistics on it. He said, but if we didn't give the drug to my mother, she was not going to reverse, that she was continuing to go down, not to come back. And he said, so you're going to end up, she's going to need full-time care. She's going to be needing to be in a nursing home. I said, hold that thought. Went out and got my father and my sister and said, hey, this is what's going on. This is what you need to know. My dad comes in. The doctor relates everything to him. And I mean, the minutes are ticking. We are this close. Yeah. And so then my dad looked at me and looked at my sister and said, okay, we'll do this. And so the doctor brought in the paperwork to be signed. And my dad handed it to me and said, we're all going to sign this and we're all going to be in agreement. He was smart enough to have made that decision because we were making a life-altering decision for our mother. If this drug worked, we were going to get her back to some semblance. If it did not work, then her brain was going to bleed out and she was going to die. That was the alternate. We would either get something or we would get death. There was no for sure this is what's going to happen. For us and in our benefit, we all three signed it, and my mother went on to live a happy life. And we got back 98%. My mother was also studied by the medical journals for that drug because she was one of only about 6 people that had gotten it at that time that survived it. So they looked at the dynamics and the makeup. But that was the case of having to make that emergency decision and nobody having the power to do it. And even if my father, who was her power of attorney because she didn't have anything, and they're married and that makes her his legal spokesperson, he wanted to make sure we were in agreement. And that's where these advocates are so valuable, so that somebody understands and knows.
Yeah, and let's face it, that was best case scenario. Your dad's respectful of you guys. You guys are in agreement.
All the time.
Yeah, that's a fairy tale. That's the unicorn. We would want all of our patients and their families to have that kind of relationship, but that's not usually how it works. It really isn't.
An advanced care plan is still have friction.
Oh, absolutely.
Advanced care plan, everything's in writing and you have friction.
I know that one of the things I try to remind people, especially if there are multiple people, you bring all of this together. You each have a skill, you each have an interest and a history, but something unites you. You have the best interest of your loved one at heart. You want the best for them. And so that's a strength. That's a strength. But yeah, when the chips are down and things are very critical and you're making these hard decisions, grief clouds everything. And then whatever family dysfunction, whatever historical relationship issues you've had, you just drag all that in. And that's a lot. It really influences how we have these advanced care plan discussions. In a perfect world, we would have time. We would each have an end-of-life doula, and you would bring a death deck in, and we would sit down, and we'd have 5 wishes, and we'd write out our what matters to me letters. That's awesome. That's awesome. If you have the time, if you have the education, if you have the access. But that's not reality for so many people.
You know, Helen, I speak to a lot of different groups, and one of my favorite things to do when I start is they'll introduce me and then I'll say, I just got a curiosity question to start. How many in this room have got an advanced care plan? And as I always say, it's like crickets.
Yeah, nobody wants to raise their hand.
2 that raise their hand, and then I have people going, well, we've been talking about it. I have people in this industry that do not have advanced care plans. And when I say to them, and they're doctors and nurses and hospice people, and I'm like, why? Just haven't gotten around to it. This is the insurance policy you write for yourself. This is the insurance policy that doesn't cost you a nickel to write. This is what you put in place to make sure everything is in order. And when we do talk about advanced care plans, you know, when we talk about 5 wishes settles some of the issues with the end of life. But to have a really strong end of life plan, you've got a lot of moving components that go into that.
Yes.
That people don't even think about. I mean, passwords, deeds, former divorces, birth certificates. The list just goes on and on. Having copies of driver's license, passports. People don't think about any of this stuff.
Mm-mm.
What happens is the person dies and then you need all that stuff. If they traveled, you've got to close their passport. Well, where's their passport? Well, I don't know. But if you had a plan and you had things laid out, then everything would be where it needs to be at the time that it's needed. So I had a gentleman that had an advanced care plan, and he had wrote it in 2015, and this is 2023. And nothing that was in the 2015 really related to what was happening to 2015. And not only that, in reviewing it, he discovered that one of his spokespeople had passed away. So he didn't even have a complete team in place.
Yeah. So
when we put advanced care plans, we write them. And when I say we, people can have help getting those plans together. And as doulas that do advanced care planning, that's what we do. And then if a doula that does advanced care planning has set that plan up, she's going to follow up with that client 6 months and a year and say, should we review your plan? Have you had any deaths? Have you had any births? Is there a divorce? Is there a life-changing circumstance financially, emotionally that we need to include in your advanced care plan? People sell houses. If you've got the deed to the house that they're living in when you wrote it in 2015, and they sold that house and it's 2023, not only did they sell that house, they bought 2 more. Where are those deeds? So there's a lot of this that needs to go together. Many components of an advanced care plan need legal guidance. And doulas are not legal guidance. We are not attorneys. And so, again, within our resources, it's our responsibility to know someone that we can refer a client to that needs that legal guidance. But the benefit is we're going to help you get everything together so that when you go for that legal guidance, you're not digging it out of the dirt and spending more hours trying to get things together. You're all prepared when you walk in.
Right. It goes back to the one and done. Advanced care planning is never one and done. There are several different things, circumstances. You might have a diagnosis. I also recommend that people look at their advanced care planning when they have a change in providers. So maybe you've had a physician that has known you since you were 22 years old and now you're in your 80s. Well, your physician's retiring or your insurance has changed, so you need to get another doctor. That doctor doesn't know you. He's not had those conversations with you, and it's up to you, the patient, to precipitate those conversations and get that started. But it's never a one and done. I think we have a tendency to feel very complacent once those documents are in place, and that's going to carry me forever,
Here's another, it's not one and done. Just because you have an attorney that puts your will and everything in place and they've got it all done, and he says, call me if you ever have a need. Well, attorneys die, attorneys retire, attorneys close businesses, attorneys swap firms. You need to be sure that you're touching base with that attorney at least yearly to know where he's at and what that status is. Because in another case I had, the attorney had passed away. And they thought, oh, he's got all the paperwork. Well, he's dead. Well, now what? Now it's a lot of scrambling. Now it's a lot of going to the courts and trying to find records and cross-referencing. And it is a nightmare when you're already living in a nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Pam, we're going to fix all the problems today, obviously. So I want to ask you, what's one thing about end-of-life doulas that we haven't discussed that you would want my listeners to know?
You need a doula from the age of 18 out. You need to know someone that does end-of-life work. They are your insurance agent. They are your physician. They are those people that you depend on yearly when you need something. And if you get someone on board that you're working with, then they know you throughout the years. They're helping you update your advanced care plans. They're helping you if your family has had a crisis. One person getting involved, and I did this recently with a family, and I got so tickled because after everything was over and done, the family said, "You realize you're not going to get rid of us." And I was like, well, I certainly hope not. But what they were saying to me is, and I knew there are several aging members in this family, and they want to know that when the time comes, they're going to have somebody they can count on.
Yeah.
They count it on you. And in this business, our main client, we generally, unfortunately, lose. So there's no retention with that client. Your retention is in working with your families and knowing your families and being a support to that family throughout the course of life. So getting to know somebody, as soon as mom and dad can't speak for you is when you need a doula. And you need that doula throughout the course of life.
Yeah, I like that. So, Pam, how can my listeners connect with you and the work that you're doing at International Doula Life Movement?
They can contact me at the International Doula Life Movement. It's just Pam at International Doula Life Movement. And they can send me an email. You can post my phone number if you want. I jokingly say I give my phone number to everybody. And, that's okay by me too, because my passion in this life, in this stage of my life, is getting the education out there. I'm passionate in helping as many people understand and navigate these waters, because it's heartbreaking to see a family in distress when if they just had somebody that could give them guidance. And that's one of the true values of the work that I do, is being a resource and someone that can give guidance when everything else just seems so confusing.
Yeah. Thank you for the work you do, Pam. Thank you for the time you spent talking with me. I'm so excited to see what IDLM is going to be doing.
We got a lot of things coming on the horizon. We're excited. We're growing by leaps and bounds, and we've got a lot of new programs coming and going to have some exciting things happen in 2024.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pam refers to herself as an end-of-life death educator. That's one of the hats, I guess, that she wears as an end-of-life doula. And it's absolutely true, because I would say that probably 90% of what she does is education. Education to her patients, education to their families, their caregivers, education out in the community, and education to other healthcare practitioners. Because a lot of folks don't know what end-of-life or death doulas do. It's a fairly new role, fairly new position, although doulas as work have been around for a long time. Birthing doulas, midwives have been around for a long time. But as an end-of-life doula, Pam educates. She educates people about quality versus quantity. And what does that mean? We're talking about quantity, how much time, and quality, I would say, how much joy. How much joy. I think that's an easy way of looking at it. So when it comes to advanced care planning conversations, doulas are right in the middle of all of that. They're going to be talking about things that most people don't want to talk about, things that they avoid, things that they find uncomfortable, things they don't understand, or maybe they haven't even considered need to be part of their advanced care planning, like funeral planning, organ and body donation, having a backup plan for whole body donation, a plan B in case the body donation isn't possible. Pam says she always includes that what if backup plan when she works with her clients and their families. She and I discussed that probably the most important piece of advanced care planning is having that healthcare proxy. That's the most important decision that a person can make when they're doing advanced care planning, because if they get nothing else done, choosing the right person to speak for them will ensure that those right decisions are made for them. She also reminded us that advanced care planning needs to be reviewed and updated regularly because circumstances change. Our health changes. Our proxies, the people that we've designated as healthcare decision makers or medical powers of attorney, they change as well. Maybe they're no longer willing. Maybe they've had health changes of their own. Maybe they've even died before we have. So we need to look at all those things. So here's a different thing that I hadn't really thought of before. Pam recommends having a doula from the age of 18. From the age of 18. To help you create and review an advanced care planning on a regular basis. So I think on the surface, people would say, well, that's too much. That's overkill. No pun intended. But it's too much. Why would somebody at 18 need a guide for their advanced care planning for end of life? Young people die too. Younger people have life-limiting illnesses. They get terminal diagnoses. So why shouldn't we normalize those conversations about advanced care planning starting at a young age? So I'm almost 58 when we're recording this, and there are times I wish that I had had those conversations, that I had thought about these things for myself years, way before now. I had some conversations when my kids were younger. I have a will that's horribly outdated because it said that my kids were going to be taken care of by my sister, which is awesome, except my kids are grown and now they have their own kids. So obviously that's a completely outdated document. It doesn't even reflect who I am anymore. And I don't have other decision makers besides my husband, who's older than I am. really what I need is to designate my husband and both of my kids, because they are adults and more than capable of helping me make those decisions and speaking for me. So a lot of good wisdom, a lot of things to unpack from what Pam had to say. Really recommend that you check out their website, internationaldoulalifemovement.com. I'll have a link in the show notes so that you can go straight to it. I'll have Pam's contact information. She's very generous, says she doesn't have a problem sharing her email or her phone number, so I'll have that in there as well. But check out the work that they're doing. They've got a really big event coming up in January of 2024, their birthday bash. You're going to want to check that out. A lot of opportunities for education and learning there. Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com, and don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram, and send your questions or comments to me by email to helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.